Welcome to Germany versus USA.
And today, we're going to talk about superheroes.
There we go. So, and as you can see, we actually have a guest here. Hey there.
Hey.
This is Tim.
Hey, how's it going?
Close quarters today. It's the shoulder to shoulder, bellied up at the bar. Here we go.
And actually, the reason that Tim is here is that Jim and I are not too familiar with like superheroes and comics. We just don't know too much about that stuff. And Tim knows a lot about that stuff. So
No social life in my formative years.
He actually applied for the Big Bang Theory. Too nerdy.
Yeah.
Didn't make the cut. Comic books in Germany. Perhaps that's just my personal experience, or like superheroes in general. Like, but we have those. There are comic book stores, but very, very few actually, not that many. But I think there's just not that comic book culture or the superhero culture in Germany as it is in the US. Like I'm aware of it. I've heard of it. Like when I was a child, I had like Batman and like the Ninja Turtles, which was also a comic, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Started out as a comic book. Two guys did it in their basement, and then it was actually picked up and made a cartoon in the early 90s. In fact, interesting. So the idea of the Ninja Turtles are these kind of wacky guys with the different colors and everything. Originally, they were all red. Their masks. They were all red, and they didn't really have it wasn't quite as much of a comedic element as much as they were just really hardcore fighting.
Raphael's red, right?
Yeah, so they're pretty much just all Raphael. Kind of that attitude, too, just kind of like,
Yeah. Angry kind of dudes?
Yeah.
Okay. So, as you can already see, they what? They know a lot about comics and superheroes in the US. I mean, let's talk about how they evolved in the US, because
they got, I think, and correct me on this, but it became popular in World War II, right? Is when or was it before that?
They started being. Now, there's a difference between comics and comic books. Comics is usually kind of considered with like the funny papers in America, or like comic strips in a newspaper, and so a comic book is a collection of strictly graphic elements.
Okay,
and so
Watchmen, for example,
yes,
that would be a comic book, right?
Yes,
right.
And actually, this is what's considered a graphic novel.
Yeah. That's a graphic novel. Okay.
Yeah. So anyway, comic books being made as early as the 20s, maybe even before that, and then in the 30s, like Superman was created, and it was of course the Great Depression is going on in America, and
so it's 29, right?
Yeah, and so all through the 30s, and that was a form of escapism, just being able to dream of a better life and whatnot, and which is kind of where Superman comes from, because he was created by two Jewish guys, like poor guys living in New York, and so then it kind of goes and picks up steam in the 40s. It's really popular.
Let's talk about this, because this is actually kind of interesting. Like in World War II, we did some research earlier, and we found like a comment of a German guy who said he was that he was wondering why like all the Germans were portrayed as like, or the villains actually in those comic books were portrayed as like as Germans, and
not a lot of good Germans in comic books.
and
a lot of Japanese at the time too. Yeah.
Well, they partnered up back in the 40s, man.
Yeah.
They did that. So I mean, that's probably the reason, because it was actually like political propaganda, right?
Yeah, more or less, just kind of showing.
Political propaganda sounds like, but
it sounds like Stalin and whatnot and communism, but
at the same time, I mean, Captain America is. I mean, of what I know, it's propaganda at its finest, in the sense of, and all propaganda isn't bad,
right? Right.
It's the word can be kind.
You're trying to defend Captain America, man.
Yeah, well, Captain America kind of created, kind of showing, World War II is probably the last war, obviously, where there were just very polarized views and oppositions, and so Captain America, of course, in America, is just showing this ideal soldier. And this original incarnation of Captain America wasn't super powered. He was just a soldier going out there and giving his all for his country. And so that was kind of, something to show kids to aspire to, and to, if they had an older brother or a neighbor in the war, they could go to sleep dreaming about Captain America fighting alongside them, as opposed to maybe worrying about them.
And also, one thing that I also read is that they also used it just to like basically create a mindset for the American people of how their soldiers are, what they have to deal with in war actually, and kind of like, make people aware, okay, this is actually a really, really tough life they're having, and, like, just create that mindset for the American people, right?
Yeah, so they're just kind of showing all of the battle and everything going on, and of course they're spinning it to make it seem like it's a lot easier than it is a lot of the times.
And Captain America is also like the purest form of a patriot too. Like so he's like you were saying, it's just completely written. Everything he does is just skewed that way.
Yeah.
So I think too, because you have during that time period, you didn't know how long everything was going to last, and you have a generation where you're kind of everyone's involved, and so even the children were affected. I guess.
Absolutely, yeah. Another thing too, like they were trying to give this mentality towards kids of like, well, why can't I buy a tin toy as easily as I used to be able to? Well, because a lot of rationing going on in the country as far as materials, food, money, everything to go to the war effort, and so that's a way to even strike the kid to, hey, don't complain, because this is what you're contributing to, this greater cause, and just stuff like that, propaganda,
So another big thing that we have here is Comic-Con, and then the East Coast one is Dragon Con. And
there are a million others. Yeah,
are there? Okay.
Comic-Con is the biggest. It happens in San Diego in July, and
Sorry, the only time I hear from Comic-Con is when they have like people from, they had Dexter, like the cast from the series Dexter, from the Big Bang Theory there.
Yeah, and then
it's just become
Breaking Bad was there.
Oh, that's true. Breaking Bad guys were also there.
It's just become not just comic books and superheroes. It is pop culture in general. So Comic-Con is the most known because, being just a hop and a skip down from Los Angeles, and in California, that's where most of the superstar, or like the stars and all.
It's in San Diego,
Hollywood
right?
is, yeah.
Okay.
And so that's where they do a lot of their big announcements. Like they'll say, here's a sneak peek of our new season, or hey, we're making this movie, and stuff like that. Dragon Con happens in Atlanta in September, Labor Day weekend every year. And it is, by attendance and just size, the biggest in the country.
It's bigger than Comic-Con, actually.
Yeah, it lasts for 4 days. I'm not sure how long Comic-Con lasts, and it is just huge.
What do you see there? Is it like the outfits? And I mean, is it crazy?
Everything.
Do they have dragons?
Some, yeah. It's Dragon Con is such a terrible name because you kind of think like super nerds that kind of smell bad, that read a lot of role-play fantasy and, dragon porn and stuff.
Yeah, you would think that a little
socially
bit.
awkward. Yeah,
I just think of Dungeons
It's not at all like, or Dungeons and Dragons. Like, it's not about that at all. Some of that element exists, obviously, but it's just kind of everything that goes on.
There's some sweaty dudes running around.
There are a lot of sweaty dudes, and there's some sweaty women, and then there are some, like, really, like, I guess what American society would consider normal people there. I like to think of myself in that category. Actually, it's weird because...
Do y'all dress up when you go? Or
sometimes. Yeah. Off and on. We have before. I didn't last year. Last year there was a big Batman group costume. Year before that, a big Star Trek Next Generation group costume. We did a Firefly costume once, which is a great sci-fi show. You should check it out. Joss Whedon, the writer and director of The Avengers, one of his earlier efforts. But mostly we would just we would just kind of go to get drunk and party and just like hang out with a bunch of nerds and go to these panels and just hear what a lot of these people had to say and stuff. And then, it's kind of become a tradition with us, but it's great. There's everything is there. You'll see.
Are there like independents out there trying to like push a comic book or a script or anything as well? Really cool.
Dragon Con is kind of more like your B-list celebrities, like kind of like your lesser known, like your really popular nerd stuff, like Firefly, for example. You think sci-fi, you think Star Trek, Star Wars.
It's probably Will Wheaton from Big Bang Theory is probably going there now.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, so you don't think Firefly, but nerds consider them on the same tier. So it's like a more niche subculture.
I love Firefly.
Yeah, it's more of a subculture thing. But a lot more of that kind of stuff there. And then within Star Wars, you won't get like Mark Hamill or Harrison Ford, for example, but you may get Anthony Daniels, who was the guy wearing the costume of C-3PO. Stuff like that. But you know, a couple of years ago, Leonard Nimoy and William Shatner were there, and that was awesome.
They were at Dragon Con.
Yeah, it's cool. And then there's a big Cartoon Network Adult Swim thing going on there because their office is in Atlanta. So.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And Coca-Cola's in Atlanta. Cheers.
Atlanta. All right, well, we enjoyed having Tim with us today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
As you found out, he knows a little bit about comic books and superheroes.
You can actually find more stuff about that, like a little more insights on our Hinterground channel.
Mm-hmm. Yep, it'll be there for just. He talks even more than
a whole lot
more
nonsense coming out of my mouth.
Y'all take it easy.
Thanks a bunch.
Thank you.
Bye.
Back it up, son, bring it on home. Drag your feet and hang your head all you want. How's the weather and how's it snow? Or is it raining? I sure as hell hope so.
Okay, so we're gonna talk about. So, you know, you remind me of Sheldon, actually.
I wish I had his photographic memory, whatever he was talking
Eidetic. It's eidetic, man.
I got it. All